Hello, I'm Samantha from Threads of My Life. This is the first in a series of techniques that I use in my quilts, and I thought I'd start with my favourite, needle turn applique. I hope you enjoy it. Right, so needle turn applique is one of my favourites just because it's so accurate and I can do it entirely by hand. I'm going to start with my ground fabric that I'm going to applique to, and I've made a template. This is actually left over from my latest quilt that I'm making, which has got a lot of these spotty dots applique to it. I'm going to trace around it first, but you can have any shape you like, really. This is a piece of old pillowcase, vintage pillowcase, I should say, really, rather than just old, that I have been using. It's got a lovely soft feel and it holds a crease really nicely. I'm going to trace round the template with a Hera marker, but you could use a knife or sometimes use the closed scissors, but you have to be careful you're not going to go through your fabric, just to get a rough idea of where you're going to be cutting. So you can just about see there I've got something to cut around. Then I'm going to cut around, leaving 1/2 centimetre, maybe less actually, seam allowance. You don't want too much because then it will get quite lumpy, especially if you're doing curves or like intricate shapes. But I thought I'd start with a curve because I don't even cut the edges. So that is what I'm going to applique down. I'm going to pin it in place, just roughly. And I'm going to choose my thread. I'm going to use a regular contrasting cotton thread. But normally I would use something very fine like this Aurifil 80 weight, which is, you can barely see it. Ooh, where's my camera? I don't know that you can even see that. But there you go. So that is not going to show up on a tutorial. However, this will. So I'm going to take a length, not too long, because otherwise you'll get into a bit of a muddle. And my needle. Again, whatever size needle you feel comfortable with. I have chosen a milliner's needle, size 9, I believe, but you can choose anything. And I tie a knot in the end. To start, I like to finger press that first bit there, and I'm coming in from the back, and you can see that, just catching a couple of threads. Now this is where the fun starts. From the front, so on the back I've got my knot, and from the front I'm going to come. Now there are hundreds of different ways of doing this. Each person has their own way. I'm going to touch my needle to the next bit and tuck it under. And holding that in place with my non-dominant hand, I'm going to stitch right next to where I've just come up on my ground fabric and up about, I don't know, 3 millimeters along, 1/8 of an inch, and again, so in just onto the ground fabric, up a little way along, just at the edge of that fabric there. Right, next, right at the edge there, and use the needle to tuck it under. Now, some people do like to use a hoop. I find a hoop cumbersome, so I don't like using a hoop, but that's not to say it's right or wrong, it's just my way. and you will find your way. It's this tucking bit, I think, you can get really lovely curves with. So just catching the edge there and using the needle to just tuck it under and holding it in place, and then down through the ground and up. You can see I've got a very tiny row of stitches there and a nice curve coming. So this is something that I use regularly. It's when I'll show you some quilts at the end that I've used it in, but it's such a lovely technique, one that you can do in front of the telly. You don't need to get the sewing machine out to do applique, and you don't need to iron stuff beforehand. You can do, but it's not necessary with this technique, especially if you choose something like a vintage cotton or a linen that has a lovely, is able to hold a crease really nicely. One thing I would say is if a fabric frays a lot, I'm just tucking this right on, so the curves can be a little bit tricky to tuck, but that's okay. Just take your time and use that needle as a sort of extra finger really to tuck under. Yeah, if a fabric frays a lot, you might struggle with the turning, but that's okay. You just have a slightly bigger seam allowance and maybe don't go for such intricate shapes. Choose a different weight fabric or different weave to do, if you're doing a very intricate shape. But that's not to say it wouldn't work. I think it's just experimenting, isn't it? And having a go. I'm coming around that curve now. You can see how lovely that is. I haven't got any straight lines that you sometimes get if you haven't clipped your seams. And yes, you can clip your seams, but I don't think for this way of doing it, I haven't found it necessary to. Maybe if it was a very tight inside curve, then maybe I would maybe make 1-2 snips. But it depends how accurate you want it. If you want it super accurate, then maybe clipping and machining or using a fusible fabric to stop the fraying at the edges. And there are other techniques for applique, but this one I just love. And it's quick. Yes, if I had a hoop, it might be a bit easier, to be honest. But I just don't like the feel of a hoop, so I don't use them. It's a bit devil may care, but hey ho. I could probably pin more as well, but that's a bit far in. That's okay though. So if I'd chosen the Aurifel or a thicker thread that has less of a contrast, the size of the stitches is a little bit more forgiving, but that's something that you can factor into your work. There's no right way or wrong way, it's just if you make it with a good intention, it will be fine. I've just come undone. There we go. Put that needle back on. We're coming around to the last bit here. It does get a little bit trickier, but I'm just going to persevere and keep going, using my needle to catch that little edge, press it under with my thumb and stitch it down. Trying not to stab myself, but you know, sewing is an extreme sport, I keep telling myself. The amount of injuries you get. Not everyone believes it though. Right, nearly there. Okay, last little bit here. Keep tucking. Might tuck a bit more regularly now. And there we have it. And to finish, through to the back, I'm going to stitch a couple of stitches through the fabric here, just catching the thread. I'm not going to go through to the front, just on the inside of the shape. So, remove my bin, and here you have it. I gave that a press. Might look a bit neater. One needle turned applique shape. Here are some more examples of needle turn applique that I've used in my own quilts. And if you decide to give this technique a go, please remember to tag me on Instagram at Threads of My Life. Bye!